Okay, welcome to El Maestro. My name is Victor Lecce III, and you are with me. Thank you for joining me today on Monday, May 26th. It is Memorial Day, by the way. I hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day. I hope you enjoyed your holiday. And thank you to all of those servicemen and women, service people who died for our freedom, who passed away in fighting for freedom and fighting for the values of this country. Your sacrifice won't be forgotten. I want to talk a little more about Memorial Day later, just briefly. I was actually listening to some sports talk radio. You might be like, radio? What are you, a boomer? No, I'm Generation X. But, you know, we also listen to radio. It wasn't just boomers and the silent generation. I don't know if millennials or Gen Z still listen to radio, but I still do. And to be honest with you, I've been wanting to say this actually, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I listened to a lot of sports talk radio growing up, and I have to say that a lot of the people that I listened to, they were like my mentors, or they were like inspirations for me to finally go ahead and to launch this podcast. There are others as well too in regards to like, you know, grad school, political figures, activists, etc. But in regards to my style, in regards to my rhythm, my flow, how I do this podcast, you know, ironically, or I guess not ironically, the word would be weirdly or strangely, I really feel like the format and the flow, and particularly my style, has been really inspired by these sports talk radio hosts. One of them, well, I listened to pretty much religiously growing up, was Jim Rome. If you know Jim Rome, you can follow him. He has a podcast on Spotify. So I bring all that up because, and that was an aside, but the reason why I bring that up is because I was listening to sports talk radio, as I was telling you, this afternoon, not this morning. I was going to say this morning, this afternoon. And one of the hosts was having a piece, and he was talking about athletes, his top 5 athletes or notable athletes who, you know, could be remembered in Memorial Day, and they served this country and also were great in sports. And I want to talk about Memorial Day later, and I like that topic because there's someone I want to bring up who probably isn't mentioned that often, but I know him, and I want to go ahead and give some commendation, go ahead and memorialize him in a way in this podcast. So you'll get to hear about that later. I have a lot of news for you today. I am going to keep it to the hour. Let's go ahead and get right into it, and let me give you the items that I normally do. You can follow me on Facebook, Victor Lecce III. We also now have a Facebook page called El Maestro Podcast. So you can follow either one. But at one point, I'm going to start putting exclusive content on the Facebook page. So, just to kind of delineate between the profile and the Facebook page. You also can follow this podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Go ahead and click follow or subscribe. I would appreciate it. And last week, I mentioned to you, I wasn't sure if we were going to continue doing highlights. Doing like podcast clips on TikTok and IG and YouTube Shorts, because it just takes so much time and I only have so much bandwidth. But I have good news. I have been able to enlist some help. And someone's going to help me to go ahead and do that, which is fantastic. Maybe I'll give him a shout out on the next podcast. I don't want to do it right now because I haven't gotten his permission. But he's going to help me out. And to be honest, I've actually been using ChatGPT, and it's pretty incredible. So I'm going to use a mix of ChatGPT to go ahead, which, by the way, I call my ChatGPT Eva, So to use my ChatGPT Eva to create to create these highlight podcast video clips, which you'll be able to see on IG, TikTok, or YouTube Shorts. And it's all El Maestro podcast. So really easy. And also this friend of mine who's going to also help with the editing. So that's good news. And even more good news, I have confirmed and booked the first guest for El Maestro podcast. It's going to happen at the end of June, and after that, we'll have one interview a month. And I'm waiting to get more details in an official blurb and a bio, so that way then I can promote it efficiently and effectively. But stay tuned for that. At the end of June, we're going to have our first interview, and I really think you're going to like this guest. And then finally, well, two more things, and they kind of tie into each other. The first is, as you know, I suffer from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, otherwise known as ADHD. And I bring it up not to get your sympathy, and I bring it up at every podcast, just so that way then in case you're listening to the podcast and I'm struggling saying something because I'm having difficulty remembering what I want to say in that moment, I'm having a hard time doing memory recall, which is a symptom of ADHD, by the way, or I get things mixed up, also a symptom of ADHD, you'll understand why. And that's the reason why at the start of every podcast as well, I do corrections. So that way, if I get something a little mixed up or it's a little off, I go ahead and correct it in the next podcast. And that way you receive the information that's accurate, because I want to give you a podcast that has information that's as accurate as possible. So let's get right to corrections. There are two corrections from last week's podcast. The first is that I had mentioned that we were talking about the change in the marginal tax rate when President Ronald Reagan came into office. He went ahead and passed the 1981 Tax Economic Recovery Act and lowered the top marginal tax rate from 70 to 50%. If it had stayed that way, and we're going to get into this in a little bit again, because I have some new information to give you, which is really interesting and delves more into why we have such a large debt, why people are the middle class, upper middle class, and lower class are struggling so much right now in the United States. Specifically, I would say in California and New York. There are other places as well. You can look it up on a map. But how their salaries should be higher if we adjusted for inflation and for productivity. And not just for skilled labor, also for unskilled. So we'll get into that. But getting back to what I was saying, President Ronald Reagan lowered the top marginal tax rate from 70 to 50% to stimulate growth and to stimulate investment into the economy, because we were going through stagflation at that time and other economic worries or other economic conditions which were making it difficult on the economy in total in general. But what I said last week is I said if we had kept that marginal tax rate the same, our debt would be 38% lower, almost 40% lower. And I should have said the top marginal tax rate. And you're like, well, that's not really that big of a difference. But it is, because if I just say marginal tax rate, you might think, what, you want to tax us? No, just the top marginal tax rate. So basically the wealthy. The other thing I mentioned was that if we had kept that top marginal tax rate of 50%, which Ronald Reagan put in, again, just really quickly, it's really surprising to me that Republicans don't want to go back to that top marginal tax rate when a Republican, one of the most famous Republicans, really, you would say the father of this modern day Republican Party, implemented that tax rate. And a 34% corporate tax rate, which was the corporate tax rate after the second tax act passed in Ronald Reagan's term. And I can't remember the name of that one, but it was in 1986. if we had kept those two tax rates at 50% for top marginal, 36% for corporate, our deficit would be nearly 40% lower, and we would have had 21 balanced budgets, excuse me. And I said, without that, we've had a total of 5, maybe a little more, under the Clinton years. And I said, we've had a total of 5 or 7 throughout history. And that wasn't correct. I needed to say in the modern era. In the modern era, that we've only had 5 to 7 balanced budgets. It would have been 21. So with those corrections out of the way, I want to get right into it. And today I wanted to try something. I don't know if I'm going to do this every podcast, but I want to do some quick headlines because there are some really more robust, more in-depth, meaty stories that I want to get into that take more time to actually talk about, explain, and really bring the point home. And when I'm doing that, sometimes I don't have time to speak about these other headlines, which are important, but there doesn't need to be that much discussion on it. There doesn't need to be that much elaboration on it. I don't need to elaborate that much on it. So I'm going to go through those right now. The first is, and we've been talking about this a lot, in regards to the tariffs, and you're like, when will it end? I mean, it's paused, but I don't know when it's going to end. And it continued again out of nowhere. Suddenly, President Donald Trump, now remember, we reported last week, or we talked last week. We didn't report it. Someone reported it, and we just commented on it on this podcast. But a news outlet said that Trump said in 2 to 3 weeks, he was going to start placing tariffs back on the world for the countries that had received a pause during his Liberation Day mass mania tariffs. So he was going to start putting those tariffs back on those countries. And apparently he just was like, okay, I'm done waiting. EU, 50% tariff. I'm going to do it on June 1st. And I'm hoping by now, if you've been listening to this podcast, you then know what happened in the market, which means you then know what happened to your 401k, your 403b, your pension, and your portfolio. It went down. The market obviously did not like that news. It reacted negatively. The S&P was down. The Dow was down. The NASDAQ was down. It was a red day. Now, I'm happy to report that it looks like it'll be a green day tomorrow. Now, the market was closed because it was Memorial Day. Oh, which reminded me. I got to get back to Memorial Day. So good. I'm glad that I said that because I wanted to bring up that one piece for you really quick. So, the market was closed because it was Memorial Day. So, tomorrow it will be open. Now, the EU and the president of the EU, I think they say president, is Ursula von der Leyen. I believe I said her name correctly. And she said they needed more time and was asking for an extension. And I believe it's in July. I don't have the exact date. Maybe July 9th. I got it here. July 9th. And President Trump agreed. So he's going to, again, pause his tariffs to the EU until July 9th. Now, before I get to the Memorial Day piece, I just have to say, I really hope the EU doesn't botch this trade negotiations like Prime Minister Keir Starmer did. Because I was talking to my mate really quick in the United Kingdom, who's been listening a lot. So we're going to bring more UK news in too. And he was saying that I was spot on and to crack on with the podcast and the news that I'm bringing you and the comments that I'm bringing you and the content I'm bringing you in regards to how labor has really been failing the people of Great Britain. It's really stumbled out of the block. And I was saying if you look like Tories, if you're acting like Tories, that's not what people voted you in for. That wasn't how you got a tsunami election, like one that they've never seen since Tony Blair. And he said over there they're calling them red Tories because the color there is red and Tories are blue. So, I mean, you can see how, this is really problematic for labor in the country. And then, as I was mentioning to you in that other podcast, Prime Minister Keir Starmer does that trade deal with the U.S. and keeps that 10% baseline tariff on their exports to the U.S., meaning what U.S. imports from Britain. I mean, horrible. That's going to impact GDP, etc. So I'm hoping the EU doesn't capitulate like I'm going to say Prime Minister Keir Starmer did. Let me now go back because the EU deserves better. And I'm going to say this too. I think there are figures, and we're going to get to this later, but in Romania, an independent centrist candidate who is for the EU won the election surprisingly. But there was a far-right candidate there, and we'll get to this later, who was critical of Ukraine aid, was critical of the EU, was a proponent of Trumpian policies, and he lost. But the reason why I bring it up is if the EU goes ahead and gets suckered by the art of the deal, fooled by the art of the deal, I think it only plays to those parties and those figures in the EU who want to espouse those far-right Trumpian-like policies. So the EU has to be really, really on their game here. They need to be on point. They need to be brilliant. Let me go now that I put a bow on that, let me go to Memorial Day. And by the way, I know we have Veterans Day, but I'm going to say this anyways. For all those who are serving now, and who've died in service, thank you. Because I got to live in a free country. And again, of course, there have been issues here, like every country. So I'm not going to do that today, okay? Maybe I'll do that in Juneteenth, or maybe Selma, okay? Or Martin Luther King Day. But today I want to talk about all those who still serve for us, who have served for us, and who died for this country, and for the freedoms we have and the values they espouse. One of those that you may not know about, and I know about, his name was Patrick Tillman, and he was an athlete. He was, I believe, a safety. He was a football player, but I think he was a safety for the Arizona Cardinals back in 2002, and he left the NFL. This was right after 9/11, so in the wake of 9/11. Most people know 9/11, but that's the terrorist attack that happened on the Twin Towers in the United States by Osama bin Laden's ISIS Islamic extremists. And he wanted to go ahead and make a difference in a different way. In the most honorable way, I would say. Definitely one of the most noble ways. And he gave up his $1 million salary and left the NFL and joined the Army Rangers. By the way, you have to be pretty incredible to become a Ranger here. So just so you know, the Army, so those who are kind of like, well, what's an Army Ranger? It's like the special forces for the Army. And he ended up, unfortunately, passing away in combat in Afghanistan. how do I know Pat Tillman besides watching ESPN and was just like blown away by this story that someone would give up their $1 million salary to go serve in our military after the wake of 9/11, to go ahead and to serve for freedom, democratic values. He actually went to the same high school I did. Now, I was a senior when he was a junior. He was an incredible football player, by the way. He was amazing. I mean, like, everybody knew Pat Tillman. In fact, people knew the Tillmans in general. But that's how I knew him. Now, I didn't know him because I wasn't cool in high school, man. Pat Tillman was cool, you know? Football player, varsity, lettered, I'm sure, whatever other award. He was incredible. I mean, he got to the NFL from Leland. Now, Leland High School, I'm sorry, I didn't explain this, is in San Jose. And those who don't know San Jose, think Silicon Valley. But in the nice part of San Jose, and what I mean nice, I want to say, you know, more expensive, more posh. Let me say that. Posh, I guess would be the way to say it. It's called Almaden Valley, and there's a high school there called Leland. So now they commemorated that field, and you can go watch a football game there. I plan to this year now that I'm back, and it's called Pat Tillman Field. So there's your piece for Memorial Day. Thank you for all those, again, who served, who are still serving, and for all those who sacrificed for our freedom. So I could go ahead and do a podcast where I am sometimes critical of the government, and I don't have to worry about my car getting raided and me getting thrown in jail. Like what could happen in Cuba or any other place where we don't have those freedoms. Speaking of freedoms and about the democratic process and democracy, this is another quick headline. David Hogg, who I don't think you know, but he is the vice president now, or vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. David Hogg came into fame in the way that you don't want to come into fame. He's a survivor of a high school shooting. And for those who are in UK, that's secondary school. So a high school shooting, it was one of the worst in history, 17 dead. The name of the high school is Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida. He was one of the survivors there, and he was a gun rights activist. And I could tell, to be honest with you, they had this protest and this huge event, and it was called March for Our Lives. It was incredible. I remember watching it. And I remember him giving his speech, and I was like, this guy's going to get into politics eventually. And now he's the vice chair for the Democratic National Committee. Fantastic, right? We've been talking about this. We need younger people in the Democrats. I mean, look at the Republicans. For example, President Donald Trump, who does he get for his vice chair, or who does he select for his vice chair? J.D. Vance, somebody young in the party with a lot of energy. And David Hogg wants to do the same. Now, we had talked about a few podcasts ago about how multiple parties could work here. That, say, a party to the left, say the progressives, they would just challenge incumbents. And what I mean by incumbents is, you know, officials and representatives or senators who've been in their seats for a long time. And, you know, the word David Hogg used, he was in an interview in NPR and I watched it, they're not effective anymore. Perhaps they're not standing up as strong as we need them to. Or if we're being honest, remember, there's a lot of money in this political system now because of Citizens United and FEC McCutcheon, two Supreme Court decisions that have allowed so much money to flow into politics that perhaps their donors have more of their ear than the voters. Now remember, this is a very challenging time in politics, so politicians have to do both if they're going to get reelected. But perhaps these are ones who are not effective, who are not showing the care and compassion and resilience and the fire and the skillfulness that we need right now to be able to represent their districts and the younger people in their districts, but also, those who've been there for a while as well too. And he wants to go ahead, and he has a PAC, a political action committee, and he wants to go ahead and get primary challengers. And primaries, this is when you decide who's going to run in the main race. So this is like, I'm trying to explain this for my British friends, but basically primaries are where you're within your party and you choose who the candidate's going to be through an election that'll go to the main election, which will be against the opposing parties. And he wants to, through his PAC, which is called Leaders We Deserve, have primary challengers against long-serving Democratic incumbents or those who've been in office for a while. So you would think this is great, except as I told you before, the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, does not do well to people trying to disrupt it and disrupt it in a good way. We talk about disruption in Silicon Valley. Those are people who are making change in a positive way. So they don't do well with people who are actually trying to change the structure in a positive way that does not align with their values or their vision. It's not as open as you think it is. And we saw this with, the biggest example is Senator Bernie Sanders. But there have been others. So what happened here at the DNC? Well, on May 12th, 2025, the DNC Credentials Committee voted 13-2 to void the February elections of Hogg. That's right. They're going to try and kick him out. Now, why? Because they don't like the idea of him running other, interesting, compelling, powerful primary challengers, candidates against their longtime standing politicians there, their incumbents. Now, the chair, Ken Martin, he was emphasizing the importance of neutrality among party officers during primaries, and he previously urged Hogg to sign a neutrality pledge or resign. He's the vice chair. You should be mentoring him. You should be helping him take the chair role eventually. You have someone who survived a gun shooting and wants to be involved in politics in his 20s, already has a PAC, and you want to kick him out of the DNC, out of the Democratic National Committee? This is the problem of American politics. And this is why I keep saying that we need multiple parties. Because they say change is going to come from within. I don't see it. Now, I'll be happy the day I'm proven wrong, but I don't think it's going to happen. We live in a duopoly. Now, what did Hogg do when he received this pledge? Sign a neutrality pledge or resign. What is that? That's an ultimatum. What, there's no discourse? There's no collaboration? There's no negotiation? Ken Martin? Horrible! And shame on you, DNC committee, credentialing committee. Shame on you for trying to oust this man who wants to bring more young Democrats into the political process and the system. To go ahead not only to challenge those who aren't serving their constituents or the party well, but also to challenge President Donald Trump and his party. And those like J.D. Vance and others in that MAGA party. Well, the Republican Party, but the MAGA wing. Do you all really want it? So what did David Hogg do? He declined the proposal and he gave a compromise. Oh, you say great, a compromise. Ken Martin said no. So I'm going to tell you, if David Hogg is listening, like I told Bernie Sanders, it's not going to happen here. We have to create another party to the left, like they did in Great Britain with the Liberal Democrats, and start it that way. I mean, think about if we had started. Now, again, I was not for Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders, when it was the election of Hillary Rodham Clinton, Senator and Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton, versus then not President Trump, just Donald Trump. It was time for us to join there and be stronger together. But let's just say it did happen then, and Bernie Sanders did split. How many seats would we have now? Now remember, some of these parties don't get a lot of seats, but they have a voice. And they're still able to go ahead on crucial bills to be able to use their leverage to get progressive policies passed. That's how it works with multiple parties. So we may not ever have a presidential candidate. Maybe not. But you know what? We'll be representing those constituencies that want a more progressive candidate. And when the centrist Democratic Party needs our help, they will come, and then we will say, all right, but we want this too. This is how politics works. So I hope you're listening. If they go ahead and kick you out, David Hogg, he was, total class act, by the way, real professional. He said if they asked him on NPR, which is National Public Radio, by the way, for those who don't know, it was on Political Breakdown, I guess. Not I guess it was. They asked him if he is ousted, what will he do? And he said he's going to continue this work. I hope you continue it outside of the party and convince those donors that we can do this. I'm telling you, I honestly think there's already independence. And I think if we just start saying independent, it could happen. But anyways, I'm taking way too long. This is supposed to be quick headlines, but this is important stuff. If we don't get to everything, we don't get to everything. And this is why we need 2 podcasts a week. So that was one of the big things I wanted to bring up. I couldn't bring it up last week. I'm bringing it up now. I do really want to quickly talk, and this will get us into some more of the media topics. Oh, I forgot to tell you some of the fun stories we have planned. You're like, we've been waiting for those, man. Yeah, so really quick, I know I'm kind of all over the place today, but I want to keep your attention. We're going to talk about... let me say this. If you've been lucky enough to go through labor, either as a mother or as a father supporting the mother, where's the craziest place that labor has ever started? You hear these stories, right? Like someone's in the car, the water breaks, or they're walking, maybe you're at a restaurant. For us, it was just in bed. Not a big deal. The water broke, you know what I mean? But where was the craziest place? Because I'm telling you, this story I'm going to bring to you later, this is likely one of the craziest places you will ever hear of a woman starting labor. The other story is, how do you define midlife crisis? Is it just by how old you are? Or is it by the actions you take? We're going to get into that because there is someone who may not meet the requirements of a midlife crisis because they were younger, but they took the actions of someone who was like in a midlife crisis, but because they weren't, middle age, you might think, oh, that's incredible. It's inspiring. For example, those who've seen the movie American Beauty, there weren't a lot of people saying what he was doing was inspiring. Now, of course, this story is a little different, but you get my drift. You understand the point. And the final one is, living by the coast is fantastic. But, I guess, you're never really that worried about, say, maybe you're worried about the waves if they're... and if you're close to, if there's an earthquake and a tsunami, maybe you worry a little bit about that. You don't worry too much about, a ship coming on shore because there's lighthouses. Well, at least you shouldn't. Stay tuned for that story, because someone, and this was in Norway, I think might start asking the government there for a lighthouse around his house. So those are some of the stories we're going to bring to you. Those are the fun stories. Getting back to quick headlines, before we get into this final U.S. quick headline, I also wanted to touch some U.S. quick headlines, because we were talking about it last week. We were talking about how labor really has to do a 180, that they're losing their support, that over half of the people who voted for them are considering switching their parties to liberal Democrats, which are progressive, or to Greens. We talked about how they did not do well in the local elections because they went ahead and canceled, or they went ahead and added requirements to the winter fuel payments, which meant a lot of pensioners weren't available for it, like 10 million people. And we talked about how Reform UK, which like the Trump party there, did very well. The leader of that party, his name is Nigel Farage, by the way. He's also an MP. For Americans, an MP is like a member of the House of Representatives. Over there, they call it the House of Commons. And he's capitalizing on this moment. He said, now I don't know if he said if he was elected, but I'm sure that's what it means. So if his party's elected, not just locally, but in the national, I don't think they say federal there, in the national government, which is where the members of parliament are, so that's the House of Commons, the House of Representatives here, he's going to bring back the winter fuel payments. And we were talking about this last week, how there's discussions to go ahead and limit already the 2-child cap payment that people receive in the United Kingdom. Now, if you're from the United States, you say, what? Yeah, you get help from the government up to 2 children. And we talked about how this is like, could be very helpful for those earlier generations, like, say, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because, they're more willing to have children because they can afford it. More children means more people in the workforce. We're going to get to this later. And that impacts the GDP. Remember, the GDP is basically the total amount of money we have for the budget for all the programs we're going to, all the programs that we're going to fund. He also said, so not only is he talking about Nigel Farage, is he talking about bringing the winter fuel payment back, but he's also talking about reinstituting the 2-child cap to removing the restriction. There used to be no restriction. I think in Wales, they might have just put a cap, but I think in Wales there wasn't either. And you're saying, well, what does that mean? Well, you could have like 4 or 5 kids and the government continues to give you a subsidy. Now, Angela Rayner, who is, I believe, the deputy prime minister, might get me wrong, but she's in charge of housing. But I think she's also the deputy prime minister, which would be like the vice president over here, kind of. I mean, not really, but you can look at it that way. She said that there's no way he's going to be able to fund it. He's just a snake oil salesman. And for those younger generations who don't know what that means, there was a time where people would sell you these magic potions, like these cure-alls, this magic oil, but it didn't do anything. It was just like more power of the mind stuff. But you know what? Labor better be careful, because he's talking what the people want to hear. And this is how he said he would fund it. He would cut foreign aid, he'd close the asylum hotels, and he would get rid of the net zero subsidies. Now, I don't know if that's going to be able to fund it. I haven't run the numbers. I'll probably do that and give it to you next week. But that's still disconcerting for labor. Just calling someone a snake oil salesman who's 7 points ahead in the polls isn't going to help you when they beat you in some pretty highly contested local elections And when the electorate is telling you that the reason why they voted for either Liberal Dems, Greens, or Reform UK was because you're acting like a bunch of Tories. You're red Tories. And the winter fuel payments, you taking that away is their proof. On top of that, the Greens there, his name is Zach Polanski. I don't think he's the leadership there, but he's one of the prominent figures there. We were talking last week about a wealth tax. Instead of doing these draconian cuts that Labor is proposing to the poor and the working class in regards to their benefits. And he is not, he's saying that too. He's saying that there should be a wealth tax of 1%. And see, there, as I was mentioning to you, of course there are people more to the left who are going to say, no, we're not going to try to reverse or fix the problems with the deficit and the budget by taking it away and injuring and hurting working class and the poor and the most vulnerable. We could do a wealth tax. We could find other ways. So, if I was Labor, I'd be really worried. Because there is a lot of challengers who are speaking policies that they should be speaking. So once again, Labor, I'm going to tell you, crack on and start being bloody brilliant. Moving to a quick headline in the United States. I guess these weren't quick headlines. Sorry. This didn't work out. That's okay. We're going to get through what we get through, and that's going to be it. And then I'll just leave it for the next podcast. So, Trump's big, beautiful tax bill passed. Now, I'm not going to take a lot of time with this because we've already been talking about it in other podcasts. These are just the Trump tax cuts, and they're getting extended. They may have added some more things. But again, this goes primarily to the wealthy, allowing those tax cuts to continue, to lower their marginal tax rate, keeping the corporate tax rate low. And the way they're funding is they're kicking people off of Medicaid. I think, I don't know the numbers. You can look it up. And also cutting a bunch from food stamps or SNAP is what it's called now. Here's what I'm going to tell you. It's not a big, beautiful tax bill. There's nothing beautiful about kicking people off of Medicaid. Who, as Al Green told you, Representative Al Green, they'll likely die. Nothing beautiful about having people lose their food stamps even though they're working. By the way, I've had food stamps before. It's an incredible program, SNAP is. And now they're going to struggle to pay for their own groceries, which means they'll have to go to the food bank. And the food banks, from what I heard, are, they're already at capacity. So that's fantastic. We're promoting starvation. And that's a little hyperbolic, but you understand the point. Sometimes to bring the point home, you make the absurd absurder. This is a horrible bill. It's not beautiful. Now, it is big because these tax cuts, they add more to the debt. They make it bigger. I think the figure is, I'll have it for you next week in corrections, I think it adds another $4 trillion to our deficit, to our budget, to our debt. Well, it creates a deficit, which then is going to add to our debt. Fantastic. And, at a time where we really need to be talking about how are we going to shrink this debt? How are we going to go ahead and find a way to raise more GDP, more revenue for the government? We're having a lot of boomers retire. That means more stress on Social Security and Medicare. There are cost of living problems, which means more people on Medicaid. You see how this becomes a compounding problem when there's wealth inequality in the United States. Now, I wanted to find that. I'm not trying to say that there shouldn't be people who are more wealthy. That's what happens. What I'm talking about is the disparity is so egregious now that means people are going to rely more on these government programs, which adds more stress to the government because it has to pay more for these services that are essentially safety net programs. And without more GDP revenue, and you're passing tax cuts, which is funding for it, and we're going to talk about again how the GDP is not as large as it used to be like in the 90s, and we're going to give you the reasons why. And people are actually making less than they are then, even though they're more productive and more educated than they are then. It's going to add more stress to the government deficit. It'll create deficits, and then they'll have to borrow money, which adds to the debt. So at a time where we really should be raising the top marginal tax rate and raising the corporate tax rate, instead we're cutting it. I want to talk about how this impacts, still Gen X, because I'm telling you, I'm Gen X, and we're struggling. Remember, we're the first generation not to make as much as our predecessors. And Millennials and Gen Z have had it worse. They're walking into this nightmare that we woke up to. But part of the problem is that we don't have as many people in the workforce. See, in 2000, which is when the baby boomers were at their their highest in regards to being in the workforce, and you had Gen X in there as well too, and probably still some silent generation. The amount of people in the workforce in 2000s was 67.1%. In 2025, it's at 62.6. That's a 4.5 percentage point drop. Now that's the median over those 25 years, because some years it may be a little bit different, right? So the average, it's 4.5% less than it was in 2000. Now, how much has that affected GDP? Well, because we have less workers in there, think about it this way. Less workers means there's less consumer spending. Less workers means there's less taxable income. That affects the GDP. And that means we have less money to fund the government. You see how this is working now? Same thing with your own budget. Say it's a household budget. Say all of a sudden you used to have, it was you, your wife, and say your eldest son. And then your eldest son leaves. Well, all of a sudden now it's just you two. Correct? You won't be able to afford as much. Same thing here. A lot of these people are retiring, the boomers. So it's a compounding effect. We lose 1.87 trillion from GDP, and it's going to add to the amount of benefits we need to pay for because they're getting their Social Security, which they've paid for throughout their whole life. You're not going to take that away from us. And Medicare. But it gets even worse because what's happened is since 2000 to 2025. So in other words, we're gonna have lost more in regards to our GDP production if we would have had more people in the workforce. So because we've lost people, that affects the GDP. So if we were still at 67%, we'd have 1.87 trillion more. Are you with me? Okay, good. But for unskilled labor, so let's go now to workers. I'm just going to give you unskilled and I'm going to give you skilled. And by skilled, just bachelor degrees, not anything above that. So for unskilled laborers, their baseline wage in 2000 was $29,000 a year. If you would have adjusted for inflation and productivity, in 2025, they should have a $40,000 wage. That means that we've lost $8,800 per worker, unskilled worker in the workforce. This accounts for what the wage should have been if it grew with inflation and productivity over 25 years, meaning it should have been at 40,000. That GDP loss is $350 billion. Now let me give you the skilled workers. Skilled workers, which is 45 million, 45 million skilled workers. Hold on, I'm trying to find the numbers here. Give me 1 second. I don't have the numbers, but I remember them, just not exactly. It was 67,000 in 2000. If we adjusted for inflation and productivity, it should be 90,000 for a bachelor's degree. Now, that for skilled and unskilled, the amount of GDP we've lost because, in other words, wages haven't kept up with inflation and productivity. So if they had, we'd have workers with more money to spend and we'd have more taxable income. That loss is 1.47 trillion together. So you talk about less workers getting paid less. That's a total GDP loss combined from 2000 to 2025 of 3.34 trillion. And we're still doing tax cuts when they don't produce the type of productivity that is necessary to be able to pay for the deficits they create and which they add to the long-term debt. Now, if we would have actually paid these workers what they should be paid for inflation and productivity, and we still had 67% in the workforce, our debt, are you ready for this? Our debt would be nearly 50% lower. It would be, it's at 48%. So it'd be nearly 50% lower. And we would be in a much better position to be talking, not only to fund the services in our government, so all those who are working out knowing they're going to get Social Security and Medicare, but also possibly to start talking about national health care, because our debt wouldn't be spiraling out of control. We certainly wouldn't have had Moody, we talked about last week, downgrade us. Right now, our debt, I can't remember what it is now, 36 trillion, I believe. If we would have put these measures in place, and also kept the top marginal tax rate, at 50% and the corporate tax rate at 34%, with paying the workers that we should, which having a 67% workforce in the labor market, our debt would be 19 trillion, not 36 trillion. And this is really important because, and we're going to get to the story soon, we may go a little bit over. I'm sorry. I feel like this podcast is going great. I feel like I have your attention. I'm probably going to do an hour and 10 minutes. So sometimes I will go over. I said I'm trying to keep it at the hour. But I wanted to give you those funny stories. So let me go ahead and continue with this. So we'd be at our debt would be 19 trillion, not 36 trillion, nearly 50% lower. We'd have more, if we had more people in the workforce, we would have an ability to be able to continue to fund the services that are necessary in the government, not taking people off of Medicaid, cutting food stamps. We wouldn't be worried about if we have to keep Social Security. We wouldn't be worried about, cuts to Medicare, cuts to Medicaid, and we certainly could start talking about national health care. The other thing is we could talk about other programs like, how to put affordable housing back in there, to put an investment into it. Because it's very difficult for people right now. Let me just tell you that in the United States, I saw this from Unusual Wales, this comes from Fortune. To comfortably to afford a typical home in the United States, households need to earn about $114,000 a year. That's 47,000 or 70% leap compared to 2019. 70% in only 6 years? That's wild. That's absurd. But real median household income in the United States is only 80,000, and it needs to be 114,000. Now, we talked about if those bachelor's degree, if the wages had adjusted for inflation and productivity since 2000, because remember, they were making $67,000 then. And if it would have adjusted for inflation and productivity, and I believe the productivity is just 2%. I could be saying that wrong. I'll have to look it up. But I saw something in GBT. These numbers, again, I got them from ChatGBT, and they also give reputable sources. But in regards to the computations. Now, in California, it's 90,000 or less is considered low income in 13 counties. And approximately 30 of 39 million Californians live in those counties. That's 77% of the population. Do you understand what I'm telling you? This is a very bleak future you are handing down to the generations below you. The wages are not increasing for inflation and productivity. The housing costs, due to gentrification, are getting exorbitantly high. The debt is getting larger. And now you're threatening to cut Social Security and Medicare. We need to do a 180 and quick. In California, it's so bad that the poverty rate there is 20%. 20% of the nation's poverty, of those in poverty, live in California, 36.8 million. This means that nearly 1 in 5 individuals are living in poverty. I've already told you that I think it's 25%. They have one of the highest homeless rates. 25% of the homeless live in California. California also needs to take a step back and really do a 180 on these policies. Here's what I'm going to tell you in regards to just tying this bow in with tariffs before we get to these funny stories. With tariffs, it really threatens the global economy. And remember, I said this in the first podcast. One of the beautiful things about a global economy is that now you can get a laptop, a phone, a TV. All electronics are so much more affordable than what they used to be. I'm telling you, when I was a Gen Xer, my gosh, to buy a television, to buy a laptop, a computer, it was so expensive. Now anyone can have a smartphone, a laptop. I mean, I'm able to do this podcast right now, part of because of like the global economy. I have a mic, I have a laptop, I have a smartphone. All of those things would have been way too expensive for me back when I was growing up. And I wanted to, I saw this, the reason why I bring that up is because I saw this chart on Reddit, and this is by Infographics, and you can follow them on Reddit, the subreddit. They were saying from 2000 to 2024, the prices of new cars have decreased by 25%. Easier to buy new cars thanks to the global economy. Cell phone services, they've only risen by 25%. Sorry. Cell phones have gone down by 41%. Computer software has gone down by 75%. Toys 75%. And TVs by more than that. I don't have the exact figure for you. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get it. Oh, by I think 98%, I think. By a lot. Meanwhile, so that's where the global economy has been great for consumers. And of course, that spurs GDP growth because we're buying. But where it's been really challenging, hospital services, and we don't have national health care here. So the Brits are like, what are you talking about? Hospital services have gone up by 256% since 2000. College tuition and fees have gone up by 187%. Did I say 256,000? Hospital services, that's my ADHD. Hospital services have gone up by 256%. College tuition and fees, 187%. College textbooks by 158%. Now consider, you come out as a bachelor. Not only now do you're saddled with loan debt because of how high the tuition and fees and textbooks are now, but you're also not getting the same wage you would have received in 2000 because it hasn't adjusted for inflation and productivity. On top of that, if you're like starting off a new family and, talking about trying to get a home, very expensive. We've just told you about it. I mean, in California, it's incredibly absurd. It's exorbitant. But you also got to remember child care and nursery school. And again, my Brits, I think some of that's paid for. It's gone up 147% here. Now, the average hourly wage has gone up 123%, but not enough. It hasn't kept pace. And you're like, well, my gosh, how much has it gone? How much do we need it to go up? Well, I mean, what I'm telling you. I mean, like, more. Housing has gone up by 104%. And food and beverages by 99.7%. So let's talk about cost of living. Housing's up more. Food and beverages are up more. Child and nursery schools are up more. College and textbooks are up more. College and tuition and fees are up more. Hospital services are up more. So yes, the average hourly wage has gone up, but it hasn't gone up enough to offset all of these costs of living that have gone up, and the wages we're receiving haven't adjusted to inflation or productivity. What am I saying to you? We're driving to a cliff. Our government officials, unless they do a 180, are driving us straight towards a cliff. And there are people like David Hogg who are saying we need to get new people into office who understands the reality that we are facing as Americans. But also in UK. Like Sir Edward Davey, like Zach Palensky. I mean, I'm going to say it. Look, the debate is still out on Nigel Farage. He has said some things that's really worried me. But now he has said this too. In regards to, wanting to reinstate winter fuel payments. Remove the cap of the 2-child credit. Now, what does that sound like? Those are voices outside of the main parties. David Hogg, even though he's a DNC vice chair, he's a voice outside of the party. How do we know that? Because they're trying to oust him. One of the things that I think that's important to try to restate is perhaps those politicians who have been in office so long, they don't understand the realities the younger people are facing because they're not living it. And they're going to ride off in the sunset, and so are their family members. It's different when you're facing it daily. Now, how is the UK dealing with this? My gosh. They had just passed, this Dutch firm, April Mortgages, are going to launch a 100% mortgage deal in the UK. 100% mortgage. You don't have to put any deposit down. Your interest rate is fixed at 5.99 for at least 10 years. Home buyers will be able to get a 100% mortgage tomorrow, and one of the first deals of its kind since the financial crisis. April Mortgages is releasing the deal which will require borrowers to fix their interest rate starting at 5.99% for 10 or 15 years. The mortgages will be available to first-time buyers and house movers with a household income of at least £24,000. That's maybe $40,000 in the United States. And you could get a home. No deposit. We're not doing that here in the United States. At least the United Kingdom and other parliamentary countries in the EU are trying to address this crisis. We're not here. And the question is, when are we going to?